$1.7 billion. That's how much money Donald Trump stole from the United States of America and us tax-paying citizens.
All right, a new book is pulling back the curtain on just how much former President Trump enriched himself and his family while he was in office, finding that nearly $1.7 billion in revenue flowed through him and his organizations during his 4 years as commander-in-chief. Joining us now, investigative reporter David K. Johnston and author of The Big Cheat, How Donald Trump Fleeced America and Enriched Himself and His Family. David, thank you so much for being with us. A really fascinating look here as you weave together all of these different data points to paint, I think, the most complete picture that we've seen of this. Tell us how much Donald Trump profited and how you were able to get to this number.
Well, Donald Trump had to disclose his finances as president. All top federal officials do. Now, several of them filed very incomplete and misleading forms. Donald, in fact, asked through his lawyers if he could file his financial disclosures without signing under penalty of perjury. And he was told, no, you have to sign under penalty of perjury. And of this more than $1.6 billion that flowed across the books of the Trump Organization and to Donald after expenses for those businesses, before expenses of those businesses, a lot of it came from the taxpayers. Donald did everything he could to make sure that the taxpayers were putting money into his businesses, hundreds of millions of dollars.
Fascinating. The Secret Service, as you mentioned, was charged a regular rate during the pandemic at hotels that were largely unoccupied. And, you also talk about it just before the 2020 election and then on his way out the door with Stop the Steal fundraising, he rakes in $500 million. He spends less than $9 million on lawyers. The rest of that money he can use how?
Oh, he can spend it on himself, and I expect that once he is indicted in Manhattan and perhaps other jurisdictions, a lot of that money will go to criminal defense lawyers.
Really fascinating. One of the examples that you highlight in his Stop the Steal profiteering that really stands out, I know that's why you focused on it, has to do with someone named Stacey Blatt of Kansas City. And this is someone who, as you mentioned, was ripped off by Trump's unchecked the box swindle. So you said, well, in hospice care, Blatt heard Rush Limbaugh tell his radio audience that the Trump 2020 campaign needed money urgently. Blatt gave $500, half of his monthly income, via WinRed, a commercial enterprise that Trump used to process gifts. Over the next month, Trump's campaign tapped Blatt's bank account 6 more times, taking the dying man's last $3,000. I mean, David, just put into perspective how unusual that fundraising practice is and if there's going to be any ramifications for it.
Well, essentially, they were stripping people of their assets as fast as they could because they were running out of money in the campaign. It ought to be treated as a criminal matter. I don't expect it to, just as I show in the book how Trump put our national security at risk with the efforts of his son-in-law to refinance 666 Fifth Avenue in New York. And we became in the bizarre position of the President of the United States attacking Qatar, where we have our most important military base in the Middle East, and aiding the Saudis, who did end up ultimately helping the Kushner family. The profiteering that went on here, particularly by Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump, is just extraordinary, and in any previous administration would have been dominant front page news day after day after day, and yet a lot of this was sort of lost in the background, Brianna.
Yeah, and you make it clear, look, this was not obviously to the benefit of the United States and its position in the world. It was to the benefit of the Trump family, for sure. David K. Johnston, fascinating read. Thank you so much for being with us.
I remember that issue in the news when people would make donations to Donald Trump on his website for that Stop the Steal. They had to specifically choose for this to not be a recurrent payment. And if they didn't, then Donald Trump's people or whoever would then continue to charge that person's credit card. And typically, that's not how it's listed on the website. It's listed on the website. If you would like for this to be a recurring payment, please click here. And so people would typically ignore it because that's typically what that little section says. But Donald Trump switched it up and said, if you do not want this to be a recurring payment, please click here. And so they didn't click there, telling them that, yeah, we would like for this to be a reoccurring payment. You can charge me $500 for however, for the next 2 weeks or the next month or the next 3 months or whatever. There were lawsuits against Donald Trump in regards to that. I don't know whatever happened with those lawsuits. I don't know if they are still pending. But yes, the news media really didn't talk about that. But that man was able to finally come up with an overall number. $1.7 million Donald Trump stole from the United States of America and the tax-paying citizens. That's on top of the $2 billion that Jared Kushner got and however much money Ivanka Trump got. They're all a bunch of thieves, a bunch of swindlers, a bunch of grifters. It's all about the money for them. This time around, Donald Trump is doing everything he can to stay out of prison and to continue to enrich himself. And meanwhile, everybody is talking about how much money the United States is sending over to Israel. Baby, if Donald Trump get back in the office, ain't none of us gonna have any money.